I can hear that rambling too from the pool holler in a shopping mall. We're going crazy as a loop. Tell me where we're gonna go. But there's no sorrow, there's no snow. Pack your suitcase like we're gonna leave tonight. But I think I might just know. Oh, without losing, I'm gonna leave down to the beat. If I don't stop, you don't just down to the beat. So welcome everybody. We will start in about 3 minutes. Down to the beat. Maybe I don't stop. You don't chat with me. Down to the beat. Down to the beat. That is high, swallowed by the sea. Gonna float on down from the land. Kill me. Oh, if I lose it, I'm gonna move down to the east. Maybe I don't stop. You don't chat. If we could, down to the east. Okay. So welcome everyone. My name is Julika von Stackelberg. I'm with Cornell Cooperative Extension. I'm so delighted to see you here. So far we have a small group, so there may be folks entering the room, but just because of time, we're going to jump right in. I just want to make you all aware that this webinar will be recorded. So I believe you should have received a message along the lines of that. So that you know, you have, of course, a choice to put your video on off or on or off. And later on, when we have some breakout groups, we will stop the recording just so that you're aware. So I am delighted to be here with you all. I just want to give you a warm welcome for coming to our first episode, so to speak, of season number 4 of our Growing Resilience webinar series, which started in 2020 in collaboration with Cornell Cooperative Extension in Delaware County. In our effort to build community resilience. So there are recordings available of those as well. And if I will make sure that you all have a link to that at some point during this webinar. So let me begin by introducing what we're going to be talking about today. So our first this whole series basically is really about discussing why public health, or why a public health approach to building regenerative community resilience is a path towards the future that can all assure or support our well-being. And so I am delighted as the resilience educator at Cornell Cooperative Extension in Orange County to be sharing with you what we're going to be discussing today. So just as you're aware, with the next sessions are going to be we are going to have this session monthly for the remainder of the year, always on, I believe, whatever Thursday it is today, the 3rd or the 4th Thursday of the month. And we are going to address different subjects. The goal of this webinar series is to build community in the process. So your participation is really welcome, and so is your input around during this webinar as well as outside of it. If you want to contact me, I'll share my contact information later. Or if you want to connect with anyone who is also on these webinars, we encourage you to do that. So the idea is that we create basically a shared understanding around this public health approach to building regenerative community resilience, and come to a story sharing session at the end of this season, which will be on December 12th. So I will share more along the way, and we will also share what we have in mind via email in the process, but just so you kind of see where we're going. We're going to take the summer months to really focus on you and your own resilience, because we can't separate ourselves from our communities. We're really the instruments and the vehicles for bringing about the kind of community resilience that we're looking at. So that means that we have to take care of ourselves too, because we're part of the whole picture. So for those of you who are new to Cornell Cooperative Extension, really briefly, there are several program areas where we have a lot to offer in our communities in almost every county in the state of New York, from agriculture to building community resilience, just like this, family life, and 4-H youth development. So I encourage you to visit our website. In Orange County, we will be hosting our county fair again in Otisville in July, and everyone is welcome, of course, or the whole family. And then there are also multiple ways that you can join us as a volunteer. We have a couple of positions open, and we're always looking, by the way, for childcare providers so that we can reduce the barriers for family members to attend our programs. And of course, we invite you to visit us. So this QR code will lead you to our website, and you can find out more about what's going on. Okay, so before we jump in, since this is already half the day or wherever this part is in your day, let us take a resilience pause. We have built these into this webinar series so that we also make space for taking care of ourselves, that we're normalizing that that's part of what is required in order to maintain our well-being, and also to perhaps teach new tools that we hope you will share with your friends and colleagues and family, of course. So there's something called the skylight method, as they make a method out of everything. Since we're an educational institution, we have a lot of those. So the skylight method is basically asking you to look at yourself as if you are looking through a skylight from, the ceiling or the top of where you're sitting. And just take a moment and notice what you're experiencing in your body, in your mind, and in your emotions. Okay, and then you can take just a regular breath, and I'm going to invite you to try out to say the word soft when you're inhaling and breath when you're exhaling. I know there's no right or wrong to this. This is just how it flows. Okay, so now that we have grounded ourselves ever so slightly, let us jump in and talk about why climate, public health, and community resilience should all be in one subject. So the key message of this entire series is really that community is medicine. We have seen throughout human history that our ability to come together as a group and responding creatively has enabled us to adapt and to difficult situations, and also helped us solve very complex issues. And so we know that by working on the community level, we can do this. We can build community resilience to these challenges that we're facing. And so this is really in this whole context of talking about the fact that we understand that trauma can be passed down through generations. Oftentimes that's referred to as epigenetics. But then that also means that we can pass healing down through generations. And so I want you to keep that in mind for especially the next few minutes, as I'm going to be sharing some aspects that are maybe distressing in terms of, our present time that we all live in. So we know that, toxic stress is an epidemic. We have come to really understand that intergenerational and ongoing racism, as well as other systemic forms of oppression, are really impacting the well-being of many members in our society. There's a growing fear of violence and crime. If you turn on the news, I don't have to say anything more. There's political polarization, and then there's vast economic and social inequities that we can see across the globe. We know that there are food and water shortages. We've just seen tons of trucks of water being delivered because there was a shortage of water in an area in our community. We know that toxic isolation, loneliness, and disconnection are impacting specifically young people today. Wages are insufficient, there's rising cost and high levels of poverty, and many other individuals and families are experiencing social toxic stressors. So we're kind of at this close to a breaking point individually and in some places as a society. And so now add in factors that are related to the accelerated impacts of climate events. We know that the weather forecast is hot, wet, and windy. We have seen the wildfires last year with the orange air that we had in the Hudson Valley, the floods in Fort Montgomery that flushed away the roads and bridges that allowed people to travel from place to place. And we've had a tornado in Newburgh that hit down really hard in Newburgh that caused a lot of damage to the infrastructure and also, of course, lives. And so the impact of this weather forecast on our ecosystem and the diversity or the biodiversity can be really catastrophic. And that's in multiple ways. And I'm going to be going into some of those during this next little bit. So left unaddressed, these catastrophes or the impacts of this catastrophe will create an epidemic of traumas that is related. And I will also share how that is related. And so therefore, we really must proactively build population resilience. So this is where we get into the community building part of it. And we have to sort of shift our perspectives from thinking about how we just treat individuals, after they have experienced a traumatizing event, or when we react to disaster or hope that, by enhancing specifically external physical structures, etc., resilience will be able to restore, or we are able to restore ourselves, and that will be efficient. So, ways that these catastrophic events can impact us and our health and well-being is basically that they add to the emotional and physical stressors that are caused by these subtle changes, whether it is through disrupted sleep because of heat, and trying to save money on the air conditioners or not having access to even air conditioners, or because of just in general hotter weather, people being forced to leave their homes on communities due to some of these impacts, which is taking place or is a reason for a lot of migration across the globe. And then, of course, the widespread hardships that are generated through these destabilized, economic systems and geopolitical systems, et cetera, whether they're built or not. And so we all, of course, depend on food, on water, on jobs, income, shelter, safety, security, and so on, for our basic needs. And so if those are impacted by this weather forecast, then that increases our levels of stress. And so in addition to that, there may be anguish and distress in general around climate pollution debts, related debts, deaths. And we know that, there have been an estimated 4 million since 2000, by which the World Economic Forum estimated, and we are estimating that these will dramatically increase to 45 million by 2050. And so what they also acknowledge is that many of these numbers are vastly underestimated. So you can talk to populations who live by the sea and see just how much of garbage gets flooded onto the beaches, etc. So that's a dramatic shift of just one of those areas of pollution. Okay, and so the thing with this is that these events don't just impact some of us, it impacts all of us. And so we can really call this a population level problem. And I think we can see this even, in our community in areas that may have experienced flooding. You have to take detours, or, more people have water in their basement, etc., which increases our levels of stress. So in the near term, how we can say, or who's impacted, is who is all of us, so that's, and who's particularly vulnerable is going to be impacted even greater. And so here you can see that, Black people, Indigenous people of color, low-income populations, migrants, ethnic minorities, young children, people living alone, the elderly, people with insecure housing, and those living in high-risk zones that have been identified, as well as people with pre-existing conditions. So, and first responders who also have to respond to some of these emergencies. And so therefore, it's important that when we are looking at ways to address some of these challenges, that we look at this in a way that we engage everyone in our communities and not just focus on the vulnerable groups, because folks who have access to more resources may experience or feel that they may be less impacted or immune to it because they have means to address and mitigate some of these challenges. And that can further increase the isolation of the groups that are just listed here. So therefore, understanding the context and the various aspects of trauma and how that impacts us individually. We know through the Adverse Childhood Experience study, and have so many documented studies now that impact or document the impact of individual trauma on our lives, but there's also community trauma. So a community trauma is an event or a series of events that create basically a blow to the basic tissue of social life that damages bonds, attaching people to one another and impairs their prevailing sense of community. So it's a gradual realization that the community no longer exists as an effective source of support, and that an important part of the self has disappeared. And that is really because we don't live in isolation. We are social beings. And so the societal trauma definition here is, if you look at that, or I'm sure there's many different definitions, but just to kind of summarize what I'm referring to here is, societal traumas can go beyond these specific geographical areas. And they can be shared and that are shared with a group or an identity, and that can affect entire cultures, nations, all of humanity, just as we have seen with COVID-19. So, and oftentimes these forms of trauma are not as well understood as the individual forms of trauma. So, Dr. Brock Chisholm said that there is no physical health without mental health. He's the first Director General of the World Health Organization. And so he very much talks about the comorbidity between mental and physical health issues, and says how common those are. Adverse social, psychological, emotional, and behavioral conditions often aggregate existing and directly produce new physical problems. And physical health can generate problems, mental health issues, and so forth. And if they're left unaddressed, then traumas can significantly accelerate. So, and that's really a bummer, because if we are facing these very complex challenges that are, impacting us globally, and we are in this fight, flight, or freeze mode, which is a protective reaction that comes from when we experience, difficult situations, that means that we're also living much more or are much more driven by decisions and actions that stem from the limbic part of our brain, the emotional brain, as opposed to the brain that has, the neocortex or the frontal lobes, that is our decision-making, rational thinking, where we're able to learn, grow, adapt, and also innovate. So if we find large numbers of people who are experiencing high levels of stress, not just in their individual lives, but also in our environment and around us, then that impairs our ability to solve the problems that we're talking about. So I'm going to take another breath, because I don't know about you all, you can probably hear I spoke kind of fast because I know our time is limited. So let's take that one more time, this soft breath approach that we just took at the beginning with the skylight method, and just notice where your mind, your body may be at this moment. And then just take a moment to breathe, and perhaps say soft when you inhale and breath when you exhale. And again, there's no right or wrong, just to say that. Okay. So that's a lot to digest, and it's good to keep ourselves grounded. So going back to what we just talked about, so most traumas really result from these interactions between the different levels in what is called our social ecology, how we interact with one another. So on our individual level, family level, social level, economic level, the built environments that we experience, as well as ecological factors. So how these interact with one another is what is, or in these places, and how that relates is what can cause the trauma to the individual, and of course the external as well. So there's a Lakota Nation saying that says that basically our health and well-being is a complex consequence of all relations, all our relations. And so, oftentimes many indigenous cultures view themselves much more as part of everything of nature than humans as a separate, so to speak, group or a superior group. And so therefore understanding how everything is intertwined and connected can help us to better respond. And so this means that we proactively strengthen these population level capacity for generating resilience. And so, when suffering is caused by previously unseen external forces that have no endpoint or resolution, or simply a cure, the priority must be to help everyone develop this capacity, right? So especially if we think about the groups that may be specifically vulnerable. And everyone must be able to buffer themselves and push back against the stressors and use these adversities then as catalysts to keep learning and adapting and construct and find constructive new sources of meaning, purpose, courage, and hope. So these are all aspects that take place when our brains are online, which is why practicing, mindfulness, resilience pauses, integrating resilience pauses, and thinking about our wellness as a whole concept with multiple dimensions is really a powerful tool to help keep us in that state in the face of, some of the adversities that we're facing. So then this capacity for what you could also call transformational resilience requires addressing these interacting individual, family, social, economic, physical, built, and ecological factors. So when these interact with one another, or when we consider how that takes place, then we can build this, transformational resilience, because it doesn't just live in our environments, it lives in us, and it allows us to come to a point where we can regenerate well-being and adapt. So that means that we have to address all our relations, right? So as the Lakota saying was saying, that these are multi-systemic factors that require thinking and working at this population level by actively engaging neighborhoods and communities with one another. And so this is really where we can roll up our sleeves and say, how are we going to do this? How can we build communities and engage our neighborhoods and communities? And so part of this series is intended to kind of spark some of the ideas and things that we can do, but also to support you with this understanding and points for conversation, whether it's with yourself, how you think about it, or with colleagues or friends and family members. So why work at this neighborhood and community level? They're the most that they're the ones that have most interface with these, circles at all these levels that influence mental health and transformational or potential transformational resilience. And so also, really thinking about ways to make it our own, in a sense that, our social values and norms are represented and regarded, that personal and family behaviors and habits and practices are considered, that safety and security is determined by the experts, which of themselves, and gets that input, that we think about housing, transportation, open spaces, and other key aspects of the built and physical environment in that way. That we consider other educational opportunities. We might discover gaps, we might discover strengths. We think about jobs and incomes and economic opportunities that are related to helping us adapt to challenging situations. And then also looking at healthy and just ecological conditions and what that looks like from that neighborhood and community aspect. So this is maybe from tree planting to creating playgrounds with shaded areas, etc. And your imagination has free reign. And so all these influences that have this ability to come together helps us learn and adapt. And so, when we think about how we can do things a little bit differently, Dr. George Albee said that no epidemic has ever been resolved by paying attention to the treatment of the affected individual. Right. So I am not saying we should not treat affected individuals by any means. And we're pretty good at that, I think. We are getting better all the time. But if we're looking at an epidemic level situation, then we need to think about, approaches that work. And so this is why this, opportunity, or let's say a public health approach to mental wellness and regenerative well-being and resilience could be really helpful in this way of thinking on how can we solve some of these issues. And so what does that look like? So it basically takes a population level approach and not one that merely focuses on the individual with the symptoms or that pathology that we're looking at with high risk groups. And so our mantra in this whole concept must really be no one will be left behind. And so by prioritizing these preventing problems before they emerge, we are also able to not just react to them, but to really create these, prevention strategies. And so in this way, thinking that, communities medicine, no one left behind, prevention is cure. And so then the question becomes, does or how can we strengthen these protective factors? That means social supports, resilience skills, habits, local resources, etc., that help us sustain that thinking, and behaviors that are supporting us in that sense. So we must build strength, social connections, and resources. And I think that many of us are actually really good at this, which is good news, because that's a skill and an asset that we can really build on. So we know that research shows that mental wellness and transformational resilience, or regenerative resilience, can be enhanced. And the most effective way to do this is to think about a horizontal social structure in neighborhoods and communities, right? So that is basically creating what is referred to often as these resilience coordinating networks. And so we are very fortunate in our community that we already have some of these in place. At least in Orange County, we have the Orange County Resilience Project. I see there's someone also from Sullivan. I know you're working on that. And there are other folks also in our neighboring communities. And of course, there are examples from all over the world that have built these so-called resilience coordinating networks as a horizontal structure in that sense to, build, increase resilience at that level. So what does that look like? It means that, we look at co-chairs and executive committees of our organizations that are, represented in civic leaders, youth leaders, public sector, and you can see all of these areas here, including neighborhood innovation teams and private sector innovation teams, etc. So we really want to look at any group of people that is organized in some form or fashion to think about, how can they be included in this resilience coordinating network. And so that basically helps us to move from what I think we've well established is kind of a trauma responsive or trauma coordinating network, where we are very good at responding to traumas that took place. And I think, many of us who are working in fields or have experienced, whether it's as community activists or in other ways, have done a lot. But when we really come together in this shape and form and we discuss these issues, then we have a chance to have an even greater impact and really create this prevention. So if we try to look at, the long-term, or why this is important, basically, why such networks need to exist for a long time is because the impact of the changes that we're witnessing these are going to continue for decades. We know the weather forecast is literally getting hotter, wetter, and windier. And so therefore, we can plan ahead. And so that also means understanding that most mental health and psychological problems surface not right away, but oftentimes months after a certain event occurred. And so this is, what a lot of our educators in our communities are reporting, is that they're seeing the impact of COVID, in the children and the youth that they're serving is really, really coming to the surface now. And so when we build these so-called horizontal social infrastructures in neighborhoods and cities and towns to sustain these basically community cohesion phase over a long term, then we're able to respond much better to the potential disasters we may experience. And so you can see this is kind of the 6 phases of the commonly seen stages of disaster. And we, kind of analyzing that and understanding that, we can respond to this a whole lot better because we have some kind of an idea of a pattern that we can identify where we can maximize input. And so there is no community resilience without human, social, psychological, and emotional resilience, because it really is a combination of all of these factors. So that means actions to reduce emissions, regenerate ecosystems, and strengthen external physical resilience will have limited effects unless they are fully integrated into the efforts to build that population level mental health and regenerative resilience. And so I do want to point out that, it may seem really daunting to think about all of these major ways, but really it's small pebbles end up filling a jar or whatever. So it does add up when we make, small shifts in different areas that we then tie together. And that's really kind of what's happening here. So disaster preparedness and response, disaster mental health, and other human services will be much more effective when they're integrated into this community-led resilience building initiatives. And so how do we foster this so-called universal literacy about mental health and regenerative resilience is by helping everyone become trauma and resilience informed. And as I mentioned, we've done a pretty good job, and we're still continuing that, because we have to, obviously, it would be ideal to get to I don't know if there's such a thing as an 80% margin of everyone in Orange County or in the Hudson Valley being trauma informed, but you get the gist. So the more, the better. And so that then helps people understand what is happening within them and around them. And that helps normalize the struggles that come along with that. That helps reduce the fear of stigmatization and eliminates the stigmatization of others. And so while building the knowledge and skills needed to prevent and heal their own psychological and spiritual struggles, and motivating some to find meaning and purpose and help others do the same. And so that's sort of how we build this community that is supportive of one another and that works together. And so you can see that here in that resilience literacy cycle that kind of, looks at these different aspects that we can continue to practice. And so there are 5 foundational areas, right? So this is also continues to go. There's build social connections across boundaries in the communities, ensure that a just transition by creating healthy physical, built, economic, and ecological conditions. So that means in all these circles we just talked about, develop mental health and wellness and resilience literacy, foster engagement in practices that promote mental wellness and resilience, and establish ongoing opportunities to heal, suffering and trauma, because of course we know by the mere fact that we're mortals, we are going to experience some of these impacts, or, we can experience trauma. So it's not about making that all go away. It's about really learning better to respond to that and therefore increase our wellness. So, and that is what population level mental wellness and transformational resilience in that sense looks like. So I'm going to take a breath, and then we are going to go have some room for discussion, because part of this whole getting together is that we also have an opportunity to share with one another and to discuss how we're experiencing, what we're experiencing, and what we may be, ideas of how we could possibly translate that into our communities. So this next part is going to be a breakout session. And I'm just going to stop my share for a moment. And then I will invite you into groups of smaller groups to be able to share a little bit some of the questions, or discuss the questions that I just put out. So maybe what I'm going to do is I will create 2-3 groups. And so for everybody, you're going to get a notice that is going to invite you to a breakout group. You can follow that. And then I will post the questions in the chat that you can share with one another and discuss. And then we will come back and we'll share back a little bit. You will have 10 minutes. So I will call you back at 12:48. That allows for a little bit of travel time, and I invite you to share the mics somewhat equally. And if you can unmute yourself, or if you cannot unmute yourself or put your camera on, then I encourage you to participate in the chat. So just give me a moment. I'm going to actually pause the recording.